Good evening. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person tonight, but at the moment I'm on a plane someplace between Reno, Nevada and San Antonio. But I wanted to be here tonight because I wanted to present a little short segment that we taped a while ago about Hilton Goldman. Many of you probably know Hilton as a nice person who gets up at the end of presentations and talks about the phrase from Will Rogers that even if you're on the right track, if you stand still, you'll get run over by the next train. And this kind of epitomizes ISPI in many ways. Now, Hilton knows all about ISPI because he was one of the founding fathers of ISPI and in fact formed the very first chapter of ISPI even before San Antonio got around to forming a chapter and forming the National Society for Programmed Instruction, which is a forerunner of our International Society for Program Improvement. Hilton was one of those people who was involved in the first trip to Philadelphia that looked at some research that was being done by a scientist who had come up with the idea of programmed instruction. And he and Gabe Opish and a few of the others who were on that trip came back and created programmed instruction within the Air Force. Hilton was involved with the Air Force in Amarillo, creating the very first chapter for programmed instruction in Amarillo. And then, when Hilton was done with his work in Amarillo, returned back to San Antonio and has been the lifeblood of the chapter here in San Antonio for the past 40 years. The ISPI, or the program instruction, really began in 1961, 1962, and Hilton has been involved all of that time. In fact, I think you can call him the San Antonio chapter because he has been so instrumental in keeping the chapter going for all of these years. So the segment that is about to begin next was taped a few months ago at Will's facility, and we finally got Hilton to talk a little bit about the early days of ISPI, about the lessons learned, or the lessons that should have been learned, and I think the segment will speak for itself. Again, Hilton, this is for you.
Just as an example, the first project I designed at Amarillo, we were teaching aircraft mechanics, and one of the things they needed to know is the use of tools. So we had set up a board with a number of samples of things that an aircraft mechanic would have to deal with. And he has the toolbox there, the standard toolbox, and he's told to go to this project number 1 and make that adjustment. Mm-hmm. So he takes the tool. If he doesn't take the right tool, he can't do it. Mm-hmm. So this is confirming his choice. And you see there was really no text involved. Mm-hmm. I guess basically I would say that program instruction involved you're being confronted with a question or problem and you make a choice and you get confirmation as to whether you were correct or incorrect.
Let's talk about some of the really early days of ISPI, back when it was not even NSPI yet.
Right. It was, I would think, 1960 or 59 that the Air Training Command took a group of people up to Pittsburgh, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember the name of the place there now, but it was an educational place. and we got a briefing on program instruction. And we went back and applied it, as I said, Colonel Fleisch directed. And that was how things got started.
Mm-hmm. Colonel Gabe Ofish was involved in that early effort, was he not?
He was the one that was put in charge here at Randolph Air Force Base.
And how did you get involved?
I was one of those who got to go to the training up in Pittsburgh, and I was very impressed. And I was responsible for training materials at Amarillo Air Force Base. So when I got back, I set up several projects, and this in turn generated enough interest that we formed a little group there. I don't recall what name we gave it, but that was the group that when the National Society was formed, we had the second chapter ready and available.
Well, as I understand it, Hilton, you formed that chapter before the San Antonio group got started.
Well, yeah, that's what I say. We had the group already operating there for at least I think maybe 2 years. So that when the National was formed, we were ready. And
when the National group formed here, who were the players? Was it just the Air Force, just ATC, or who else was involved?
When they decided to form a group here, there were Gabe Ofish and 7 other people, and I don't know that I can recall the names now, but one of them was a professor at Trinity University, and
Jack Warkian, somebody Driscoll come to mind.
Yeah,
Walt Driscoll.
Walt Driscoll was one of them, right? Jack Newman was another one.
Yeah.
But that was the initial group of 7, and it grew very quickly to about 50 people, and that's when they decided to make it a national organization instead of a local one.
Yeah. And people like Don Tosti and Tom Gilbert, Stephanie Jackson, Bob Mager, were involved very, very early on in that effort too.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about lessons learned with our design for a ISPI virtual museum website that we talk about some of the things that have been done in the past. You raised a point about lessons learned. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I really mean is lessons that should have been learned, because I don't guarantee that they were. But the most successful attempt within the Air Training Command in the early days was done at Chanute Air Force Base. And the reason it turned out to be much more successful than the other efforts at the other bases was that the general in charge there first gave a one-day training to the top officers in charge, and then there was a 3-day training period for their subordinate officers, and then after that they had more extensive training for the people that were actually going to do the work, designing and developing. But what made this so much more successful was that there was support from up above. They knew what to demand of the people, and the people knew what that they would be understood when they brought up their problems or whatever. Strangely, in a lot of places that doesn't happen. For example, and this is true in businesses especially, the boss will say, I want a 1-week course for such and such, with no idea of what needs to be taught precisely, or how it's to be taught, what the actual needs are. So that's one lesson that still a lot of people have to learn.
You're talking about the early history of teaching machines, and I understand that at one point there were something like 100 different companies that were manufacturing teaching machines.
Right, and because that looked like a big money-making thing, there was a lot of interest at the moment. But when it came to designing programs for those, there were very few, because that took a lot more skill. So a lot of teaching machines went out very quickly. There were a few that hung in there for a while. And they weren't always used properly when they were used.
Yeah. One of the other lessons we might draw from that example is that it's a lot easier to design a machine than it is to design the programming that goes on that machine.
Exactly. Then another type of problem, the same people that designed the teaching machines thought when they did have something that could be used, they decided that, well, let's export it to other countries, and without any concern for whether those countries have the same, well, I don't know what the word is I want, but for example, there was one program that was sent to a small country in Africa where the concept of 3 dimensions is not taught in school. And the child watching this thing wants to know from the teacher, why is the boy standing in the wastebasket? He was standing in front, but it looks like he's in the wastebasket because he doesn't understand about 3 dimensions. So there are a lot of cultural things that were ignored. Okay, and another very important and very common mistake. They want a program designed, but didn't think about what kind of support was going to be needed to make it operational. So, for example, and this actually happened, we spent probably about 6 months designing a program, and we're with a deadline to make it operational, and it turns out to involve a lot of art, photographic materials, and they go to the audiovisual department and they say, we just don't have the capability of preparing these things. So the project dies.
So they didn't think through all of the things
That's
that
right.
would be needed for the project.
That's right. This is basically a management problem.
Yeah.
Designing instruction that without any consideration of what the actual needs of the trainee are going to be. The instructions put together because whoever put it together thinks that's great stuff.
Yeah.
And we have examples like this where the trainee gets instructions effectively designed, he learns, but he will have no reason to apply it for at least 4 years. By that time, he could have forgotten it, things could have changed.
Yeah, and these things still happen today. The Coca-Cola company went through something exactly like that a few years ago when they decided that everybody in their organization needed to be cross-trained in some things that they knew were coming up. But it took about 2 years for those plans to actually get implemented, and during those 2 years, many of the employees left or went on to other jobs, and so much of that training effort, I understand about $2 million was wasted. Just exactly what you said. Yeah. And if we learned that lesson early on,
Right.
and we wouldn't be repeating the mistakes of the past.
Yeah. And we could go on there and a lot of other things, but those are kind of, I think, good examples of what the problem is.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Hilton.